Gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass S 4834, the Providing Resources, Officers, and Technology to Eradicate Cyber Threats to Our Children Act of 2022, or the Protect Our Children Act of 2022.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 4834, an act to reauthorize the National Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force program.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous, not erroneous, materials on S 4834. We would hope not.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of 4834, S 4834, the Protect Our Children Act of 2022, a critical piece of bipartisan legislation that would authorize the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, or ICAC, which has worked tirelessly for 14 years to protect our children from online predators. It is no exaggeration to say the Internet today is one of the most dangerous places for our nation's children, many of whom spend hours each day online. Predators use social media and other online resources to groom and entice children to commit sexual acts. The Internet makes it easy for sex and labor traffickers to gain clandestine access to children and teens, recruit them in their organization, and exploit them. The Internet is also the primary vehicle for distributing child sex abuse material and committing criminal acts of sextortion against minors. It also provides an open forum for cyberbullying and online harassment, which can lead victims of such conduct to withdraw, become depressed, and even commit suicide. To combat these monstrous crimes and to protect our youth from exploitation, ICAC task forces work with federal, state, and local enforcement to develop an effective, holistic response to cyber crimes against children. Their programs include forensic and investigative components, training and technical assistance, victim services, and community education. This network is made up of 61 separate forces, 3 of which are in my home state of Texas. These task forces are created and authorized by the original Protect Our Children Act of 2008, which expired this past September at the end of the fiscal year. Yet online threats to children and the need for ICAC task forces are only growing. Between 2008 and 2021, the number of these arrests rose from 2,500 to more than 10,000 each year. This agency's work resulted in more than 137,000 investigations and 90,300 forensic exams in 2021 alone. Earlier this year, the Southern Texas Task Force received significant funding, its first, authorized by Protect Our Children Act, allowing it to provide substantial investigative, prosecutorial, and victim-centered services and to utilize tips from the ICAC database and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a long-standing agency that's been fighting missing and exploited children to identify and rescue child victims. But the work of the task force and that of this task forces nationwide will not be able to continue unless we fund this critical law enforcement initiative. It is therefore essential that we reauthorize the ICAC program by passing the Bipartisan Protect Our Children Act of 2022. The act would extend funding for these task forces and programs through 2024. Without this crucial legislation, our children will remain vulnerable to those who seek to exploit and hurt them in the most horrific of ways with the ease and anonymity of the Internet provides. I commend my colleagues, Representative Wasserman Schultz, for her work on Protect Our Children Act as far back as 2008, and I urge my colleagues to support it. With that, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield such time as I may consume.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. S 4834 reauthorizes the National Strategy for Child Exploitation Prevention and Interdiction for an additional 2 years in 2008. Congress passed the Protect Our Children Act, which required the Attorney General to develop and implement national strategy for Child Exploitation, Prevention, and Interdiction. The Protect Our Children Act formally authorized the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. These task forces support state, local law enforcement agencies in combating online enticement of children and the proliferation of online child sexual abuse material. Since its inception, nearly 90,000 individuals have been arrested because of complaints reviewed by these task forces. They not only put the dangerous criminals behind bars, but they also provide outreach to communities to spread awareness about and hopefully prevent internet crimes against kids. I urge a yes vote on this legislation, and Mr. Speaker, we yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may conceive.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
You can use. Let me submit into the record Houston, and let me congratulate my own community. Houston ICAC Task Force records 9 arrests for child exploitation, showing that there is true evidence that this program works, and looking forward to this legislation passing. Ask unanimous consent to submit into the record.
Without objection.
Is this the only one? And to again have the emphasis that anything to protect our children is crucial. I want to thank Congressman Wasserman Schultz, and I will reserve my time. You yielded back, did you not? And so I'm prepared to close. And Mr. Speaker, there are thousands of children exploited on the internet each and every day. As the global online community continues to grow, so do the very real dangers facing our nation's children. I do want to take note that Ms. Wasserman Schultz has really developed this legislation and worked very hard on it, and we have applauded her work starting in 2008. This will be a major, if you will, addition and asset to fighting against the scourge that goes against our innocent children. And so we have developed a vast and effective program that has continued to evolve and improve our fight against online child exploitation. Let's continue this program. We cannot allow this program to die. We must pass the Protect Our Children Act to reauthorize these task forces and to allow them to continue their brave and crucial work that keeps our children safe. Speaker, I have an additional speaker, and I'd appreciate the opportunity for, as I was just speaking about Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, and work with her and realize her work in 2008. So it's important for me to now yield 2 minutes or more to Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz.
Gentlewoman from Florida has the floor.
Thank you to the gentlelady from Texas, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to Mr. Jordan. As I try to catch my breath, I rise in strong support of the bill before the House today because my colleagues, at this very moment, thousands of children are waiting to be saved. The internet can be a dangerous neighborhood for anyone, but especially vulnerable children. The ever-expanding reach of the internet has fueled an exploding multi-billion-dollar market for child pornography. Tragically, this market exploits the graphic images that result from the horrific assault of more children. The pandemic only exacerbated the problem as our world shifts more online. But these are not just heinous online images. They are crime scene photos created by a thriving industry that uses children as sexual commodities. Almost 15 years ago, I introduced the Providing Resources, Officers, and Technology to Eradicate Cyber Threats to Our Children Act of 2007. With the support of Mr. Jordan at a House Judiciary hearing on that bill, we heard from a very brave young woman, Alicia Kosakavich. She was abducted by an internet predator at just 13, held captive in his dungeon basement, and sexually tortured for 4 days. The FBI found Alicia because the Virginia Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, or ICAC, had the technology to lift the digital fingerprints of this perpetrator's crimes. They were able to discover the location where he held her captive, chained to the floor, connected to a collar around her neck. Internet crimes officers tracked the IP addresses back to his door and literally rescued her from death. I remember her testimony like it was yesterday. It moved many of the members of that committee, including myself, to tears. In the 20 years since her abduction and torture, Alicia still shares her personal nightmare to help protect other young people. Over that next year, we learned a lot about these offenders, who they are, how they operate, and most important, where they are. We saw detailed law enforcement maps that showed the locations of hundreds of thousands of sexual predators, 5% of whom had actual child victims waiting to be rescued. It was a truly harrowing environment they described, and Congress acted. With then Senator Joe Biden as my Senate partner, we passed legislation establishing the National Internet Crimes Against Children, or ICAC's Task Force Program, a specialized group of law enforcement officials dedicated to the protection of children. The task forces grew from 42 to 61, and arrests and child rescues doubled. Okay. They doubled. Literally thousands more predators were apprehended and children rescued. An untold number of sexual assaults were prevented.
Gentlelady, additional minute.
Thank you. Okay. The Protect Our Children Act, the bipartisan legislation that I introduced today, this week, with Senator Cornyn, Shabbat, Custer, and Reschenthaler, reauthorizes the National Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Program, the national network of coordinated law enforcement task forces investigating and prosecuting those who sexually exploit our most vulnerable constituents, our children. According to estimates, half of the arrests made by ICAC's teams lead us to the door of a hands-on offender and thus a child waiting to be rescued. We must make the protection of these children the focus of all of our efforts. Please think about these precious children being victimized. If you are a parent, God forbid it was your own child. Let's give these ICAC teams the resources they need to rescue as many as possible. An impressive and deeply troubling investigation by the New York Times described the forces arrayed against these ICAC teams as an insatiable criminal underworld, and one in which tech companies are not always totally or willing to confront. But if we empower these ICACs with today's reauthorization, thousands more innocent children will be protected from these unspeakable crimes. We owe them that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my colleagues for your indulgence. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to support S. 4834, Protect Our Children Act of 2022, and I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 4834? Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.